I'd like to thank all of you for coming today to this presentation of the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program. We have two more in the series. This is just the last presentation that I'll be giving for FMFP. I'd like to especially invite you to those, and so I'll let you know what's coming up. Hi, Paul. And that is a week from today, Leslie Madsen-Brooks, who is a longtime coordinator of programs for the Teaching Resources Center, someone who earned her PhD in Cultural Studies here at UC Davis. She has been given a tenure-track job at Boise State University. And so she'll be leaving the TRC and the university coming this summer. And Leslie, like Michaela Hunsinger and myself, she spent a great amount of time thinking about best practices in teaching. And there are some sorts of advice that one can give when one is walking out the door that one can't always give when one's returning to one's desk for another year or 20. And so she's going to give us some of that advice next time. And also, she's switching roles. She's moving from that of a staff member who is taught freshman seminars here and also continues to teach on occasion for John F. Kennedy University. And she'll be moving to the tenure track and to, hi, come on in, and to the academic Senate track at Boise. And so she'll have some reflections on that as well from a teaching point of view. So I hope you'll come back for that. And then in 2 weeks, we have Naomi Janowitz of Religious Studies, and she'll be here to talk about teaching and also to reflect a little bit on Mark Blanchard, who many of you know is an award-winning teacher who passed away late last year. And she's going to share some thoughts on what she's learned from Mark about teaching. My name is Andy Jones. I will be introducing myself in just a moment. But first, I'd love to get a sense of who's the room and give you all a sense of who's here. So let's go around the room and just briefly say hello to one another, starting with the director of the TRC, Wyndham McConnell.
Wyndham McConnell, Department of German, and since last July with the Teaching Resources Center, and an avowed opponent of acronyms.
Robert Moorhead, Sociology.
Hi, Robert. Thanks.
I'm Larry Vanderhoof, Plant Biology and Chancellor Emeritus.
I'm David Whitman from Physics.
Hi, David.
Colleen Heiner, Geography.
Hi.
Paul Slitsky, Exercise Biology.
Cindy Contreras, and I'm staff to Chancellor Emeritus Vanderhoff.
David Fay, Japanese.
South Fujimoto, Community Development, Asian American Studies.
Antonella Basti, French and Italian.
Bob Summer, Retired Psychology.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon. I see some of my remarks as kind of as a warm-up act for Karma Waltonen, who will be who's teaching right now, but who'll be here in just about 25 minutes. And she has a brand new book out that she's co-authored called The Simpsons in the Classroom. And it's about ways that one can use The Simpsons, the TV show, as a teaching tool and expanded more broadly to a discussion of how is it that we engage our students and how can pop cultural topics help us with that. With my portion of today's program, I've given you a handout, which there are some more copies of over here if you've just arrived. Thanks. Which we'll be reading from, and then from time to time I'll jump over to the computer and we'll look at a couple links and other resources as well. I've called this Back to the Trenches, up to 10 teaching techniques that I'll try in 2011. And as I was just saying earlier, I've been working for the Teaching Resources Center in a split appointment for a number of years now, and before that for Academic Technology Services doing some of the similar work, focusing on instructional technology. And I'll be returning this fall to teaching full-time, which I'm very excited about, but also very daunted by. Larry Vanderhoof and I have had conversations about the challenges of returning to teaching, the expectations of our young students, students who are very savvy, who sometimes are skeptical, who expect to be entertained and inspired as well as informed. And so there are a great number of challenges there. And I've been thinking, well, I've learned a great deal from my work at the Teaching Resources Center and for Academic Technology Services. And I've wondered how, with this sort of wide-ranging and almost entrepreneurial energy and focus, how am I going to focus this on these groups of mostly 25 students that I'll get to teach with a 7-course teaching load in the coming year. And what I've come up with has been a number of resources that I'm going to take advantage of, or approaches that I'm going to try. Today's talk is more about laying the groundwork for insights and ingenious assertions and arguments that will be made later on, rather than my trying to make all of the arguments myself. In part because I'm going to use this summer to reflect on many of these issues, and in part because I have 10 of them and we wouldn't have time. So, and I'm going to start with an issue that has been very important to the Teaching Resources Center recently, and that is how can we best prepare the faculty to think about student learning objectives with regard to our upcoming accreditation review by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. And the TRC staff, we've been asked to help faculty think about, well, what do you expect from your students who come out of your major? Students who major in the discipline in which you teach, what do you want those students to know and be able to do once they graduate? And it's a big question. It's a very important question. And I think that to answer that question, one thing we have to do is step back and say, well, what is the purpose of undergraduate and undergraduate education? And what are the learning objectives for students at UC Davis? Luckily, we have a website, here it is, that includes a number of objectives that participants at the Chancellor's Fall Conference in 2001 had come up with. And I return to these in TRC talks that I give. I return to them in the classes that I teach here at UC Davis. And you can find them very easily. And so one thing I do for any kind of class, and I talk about this with my students, is I put these up on the board and I'll say, well, which of these objectives are we going to focus on? How are we going to move you towards, if not a mastery, a much more higher comfort level with these different sorts of skills? I focus a lot in my writing classes on effective communication skills. And these definitions, this start of a definition, written, oral, interpersonal, and group, they get to practice all of these in my class, which they appreciate and which their employers appreciate after they leave UC Davis. But I think most of the classes we teach will touch upon these different skills, cognitive skills, cultivating the virtues, developing focus and depth in one or more disciplines, developing leadership skills, and I'm going to return to that in a little bit, and then also this idea of a global perspective and preparing for lifelong learning. And it's this last bit that I really enjoy returning to as a lifelong learner myself, very much the way that I'm doing today. I'll say, well, here's a new learning project, a new teaching project that I'm working on. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but here's my goal, and these are the steps I'm beginning to take, what I'm thinking next. And I'll tell these little stories, sometimes 5-7 minutes in a class, and especially in a writing class where students are thinking about their own projects, they're thinking about their collaboration skills and how important those are, that I try to model for them an enthusiasm for lifelong learning that I think is important that they take from their education here at UC Davis. So, but to put this back in the context of what I've written on the handout, I think it's very helpful for us as we reflect on the learning objectives that WASC is making all of us think about. It's helpful for us to put these in the context of what are the learning objectives for the major, for this particular course, what sort of grading standards am I using, and in the writing program, we all use the same grading standards. And mostly I focus on this A column. Let me just get this to stop popping up here. Okay. Where we look at what are the characteristics of an A paper with regard to its ideas, its organization and coherence, its support, its style, and its mechanics. And this sets a high bar, an appropriately high bar for our students, but it also helps us to grade fairly and in a transparent way. In other words, students very much appreciate if they know just how they're going to be evaluated. And because they know that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to earn an A in the class, but it helps me when I am justifying grades, especially low grades that I have to give out from time to time, especially early on in a writing class, the quarter of a writing class. And it helps students to think about, well, what are my own learning objectives and how do they coincide with what's expected of this particular paper? Something else that I've done in a technocultural studies class that I taught in the winter is using that as a model, I take every single assignment that students are expected to submit over the course of the quarter, and I describe for them very specifically what my expectations are for earning an A. Now, not every student is going to choose every one of these. They have some options. So some of them may write a radio script or a storyboard of a movie scene or whatever the case may be. But because in my writing across media class for technocultural studies, these are not typical essay assignments that they have experience with in the past. And so I feel I have more of an obligation to make very clear what my high expectations are. So now to go back to this, so I have filled in some of these. Like, you know, I would talk to students about the purpose of an undergraduate education, but we have elements of these filled in and a grading criteria for each assignment. I think the next step for me, if I'm looking towards the future, is what sort of strategies for success document should I give them after something of theirs has been assessed? You know, what's the next step? What sort of additional guidance can I give them? And how can I provide that in paper form as well as in class discussion and in visits and office hours? The document you have links to that undergraduate studies website, which I think you'll find to be helpful. Well, one element of lifelong learning is the need, I think, for our undergraduates to recognize their own responsibility for their learning, that they are making choices that show that they've decided to come to UC Davis, they've made a commitment to take our class, and we have very high expectations of them. I think, and I'm learning this as a parent as well, you want to inspire and you want to guide, but you don't want to hold the hand necessarily of the student. There's a time when they need to realize that they're going to have an important play an important independent part in mastering a particular skill. One way that I ask students to take responsibility is with a questionnaire that I give them and ask them to fill out before they submit an essay to me. And this came up, maybe 15 years ago now, when I would have students who would sometimes miss my plagiarism talk. You know, they joined the class in week 2. And so they'd say, oh, well, you never told me I could do X, Y, Z. So I make sure that students understand what plagiarism is, and then have them talk about sources and other sorts of things. And the very first version of this questionnaire included only that, because I had to refer students to Student Judicial Affairs who pleaded ignorance once they got there, and that made me look bad as a teacher. Why didn't I cover this important element? Well, it's because they joined the class in week 2 or 2.5. So I wanted to make sure that I covered that. But eventually I would also get into some of the writing issues that were important to me, or even a couple pet peeves such as using strong verbs, or I read the absolute final draft of my essay how many times before submitting it. And I did that because in the same class where I had the plagiarist, I had one student who submitted a paper that was page 1, 2, 4, 5, 3. And originally I was like confused. You know, there's no continuity here in this paper. And then once I finally figured it out, I wonder, how does this come into the grading process, right? You know, do I mark a student down just because she put the pages in the wrong order? So this sort of thing, it makes students be more reflective on their own commitment to their education. So I go on from there. But in the context of my talk today, I'm thinking, how am I going to ramp up to doing a responsible job of grading, say in a 3-course quarter, 6,000 graded words from 75 students? I'm not going to do the math because it frightens me, but that's a lot of hours sitting in cafes, you know, grading papers. And I'm thinking that one reason that takes so many hours is that students are not often absolutely clear on the structure and purpose of the essay and of individual paragraphs within their essay, despite my lessons, despite my pleadings. But what if students had to include a version of this questionnaire where they had to ask and answer some prose questions, such as about the relationship between their topic sentences and their thesis statements, or the specificity of the evidence that they're providing. That if I make students do more work up front, I think that they will get higher grades on the essays they submit to me, and it will not be such an onerous task to grade, say, 75 essays at a sitting. So one thing I'm going to do this fall is start to think about, well, what sort of self-assessment would be helpful to my students in this way without providing them a huge amount of work, but again with this purpose of having them take responsibility for their own education. And then after the instructor assessment of an essay, what sort of action plan for improvement should exist? And I always give advice, but you don't always know that advice is taken. And this is very important because writing classes at UC Davis, they build in multiple iterations of hopefully helpful feedback. But you don't always know what the relationship is between the feedback and what they're going to do with that next essay. Sometimes 5 or 6 essays are assigned over the course of a 10-week quarter. So I'm thinking of asking students to write a quick action plan of how they're going to improve from one essay to the next, and then give me a short accountability report with the next essay. Now, I'm piling on lots of bureaucratic paperwork here, and so I have to be careful. But these are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and that will eventually support students' concern about their own grade point averages as well. Okay, the third, and clearly we're not going to get to all 10. The third is that this fall, for the first time, I'm going to be teaching an entirely online class. And Paul, I should consult with you because I know you've done a lot of this. The Graduate School of Management has approached me about teaching 3 one-unit classes to the participants in that program. And these will be entirely online. They'll be structured somewhat like freshman seminars in that they'll only be 5 weeks long. 1-credit classes, and we're going to be focusing on classic business literature. I'm doing research now to figure out what that might mean. But I have new responsibilities to put as much energy and to focus as much on student learning in an online forum as I have when meeting face-to-face with students. And with my 10 years of work as the host of a public affairs program where I interviewed 2 or 3 people on the radio once a week, and with how much I enjoy interacting with students, that sort of eye contact, I realize, has become very important to me. And so I'm wondering what sort of substitutions for conversation exist, and how will the variety of tools that I've been counseling faculty on for the last, well, really 15 years, how will I begin to use those myself as in lieu of the face-to-face contact that I so depend upon when working with students? Well, there's a great resource here that I shall show you presently from our friends up at CSU Chico, and it's a rubric for online instruction. And what they've done is they've taken this idea of online instruction, and let me just say that this is relevant to all of us who will be teaching with any online tools, such as those available through SmartSite. And they divide this idea of online instruction into these 6 categories, and then ask many of the questions that I've started to ask with this talk, but within this particular context. So, for instance, when we are talking about instructional design and delivery, and here this is set up a little bit like the grading rubric that I mentioned before, and so I'm going to go right over to exemplary. What is it that a great course does? A great course offers ample opportunities for interaction and communication, student to student, student to instructor, and student to content. And that is one of the big challenges of teaching an online class, right? How are we going to represent and foment that sort of interaction? And how much of it will be in real time, say chat rooms? How much of it will be asynchronous in the form of forums? These are things that I have yet to decide how I'm going to do this. There's going to be some sort of blog format, and students are going to be, I'll be asking them questions, and they'll be answering them and also talking with one another. But what I realized in looking over this in preparation for today is that many of the questions that are being asked here about online instruction are also very important for us to ask about the classes that we teach, no matter, if we never use any bit of technology outside of chalk, such as course goals are clearly defined and aligned to learning objectives. And this is crucial. What is it that we are doing in our classes? We might ask this about learning activities as well. Learning objectives are identified and learning activities are clearly integrated. One of the themes, I bet, of Leslie's talk next time is that the activity of our students can not only be sit and listen, right? That we want them to do things in our classes. What is it that we're going to ask of them? How is what we're going to ask of them going to be connected to our objectives for the class? And then we might think more largely about the major and about the undergraduate objectives for learning that I brought up earlier. So I found this to be a very helpful resource and a number of questions for all of us to ask about the classes we teach, whether they have an online component or not. Any questions about anything that I've brought up so far? Yes, thanks, Antonella.
I have a question about the learning objectives and student participation and becoming responsible for the learning. Do you ask students at the end of a course to reflect on the learning objectives and if they feel they have achieved them? You know how we give a questionnaire at the end, anonymous and so on.
Right.
Do you also give one just for the learning objectives?
So that's a good question. Almost a separate sort of assessment about the extent to which they've met the objectives.
Exactly.
I should. Here's what I do instead. I say towards the end of the quarter, remember, here were the objectives of this class. This is how we worked on this. As you worked on this third assignment, notice the connection here. I end more on a pep talk rather than an assessment. I think there are 2 important reasons for that. One is that it's a 10-week quarter, and it's difficult for students to learn how to write well given just a 10-week quarter, no matter how heroic my efforts, right? That there's just not enough time there. some students will pass out of the lower division writing requirement at UC Davis, or maybe transfer students will take it at a community college, for instance. And then when students come to me in an upper division pre-professional writing class, I'll say to them, in a perfect world, you would have a year of writing instruction, which seems reasonable. At a school with semesters, that would be 2 semesters. Sometimes students will get only a single semester, maybe 16, 17 weeks of writing instruction. We here at UC Davis, we're going to try to prepare you with only 10 weeks. And so some students may feel like they've taken some important steps towards those goals, but they're not quite there yet. So I want to show them, here's what you've accomplished. The other thing is I want to tell them what I do with that same speech is I say, look, you've got to keep it up. You're not done just because we're done with our time together. You've got to keep reading and writing and challenging yourself and integrating these skills that we've been talking about all quarter into the work that you do as a thinking, active citizen and as someone who continues to be curious about the world. So, so I bring up those learning objectives, but I don't ask them to self-assess with the objectives specifically in mind. Paul?
I have a comment and a question. The comment is for the online teaching, I'd recommend if people are interested to go to Ball State University's website because they do a lot of online instruction. That's where I was employed to do that. It's bsu.edu.
Okay.
And you can search around for all their online stuff. And the question I have for you, Andy, is on the student accountability plan. You have the action plan for improvement. So I'm thinking about a class, I have 275 students, and they write a lab write-up. Would it be useful to have a criteria for if you score a certain amount and below, that you then have to do that? Yeah. Does that make sense? And how do you?
That does make sense.
Okay.
And what that can do in a really large class is that can be a substitution for, please drop by my office because I'd like to talk to you about these issues. Because a lot of those issues are going to be the same for a number of those students who are not doing so well.
Or I'll only let you drop by my office if you bring your action plan.
Right. Yes, I want students to drop by my office no matter how unprepared they are, because I can help them. If I could just get at them, I can help them. But yeah, that's a very good point. Another way that I do that in a writing class is I say is with the revision policy that students can improve their grade through a revision process. But if they merely take into account my comments and, quotes, correct the paper, they're not going to get a significantly higher grade. That I require a lot more work. And that would include an action plan for improvement and an accountability report. But I do this individually with students. And kind of what you're saying is, well, what sort of framework for improvement can we create for an entire class? Good question. Winder?
One of the major points that we've been working on, of course, over the past few months, years even, is participation. Think of the freshman seminars and how they're set up to encourage as much student participation, student instructors. With online learning or even hybrid courses, that type of participation would it not be of necessity different? How different? The fact that you don't have the physical person before you. What compensates for that? Do we end up having to modify the participatory element, or is there another way of dealing with this?
That's a very good question. What the dean who recruited me told me was, for the Graduate School of Management, for instance, students, they are not primarily driven by the joy of learning by the time they're earning an MBA. They want to earn that MBA. And so activities that are not directly connected to them earning credit towards that MBA, they will not be so interested in. And so he suggested to me that I explain to them what an adequate and reflective comment on a reading, say, would be, and then explain to them precisely how many of those they have to submit, how many responses to each other they have to submit, And then I'm going to ask for a portfolio at the end where they show me they quantify it, they show me the quantity, and then I'll ask them to reflect on the quality and make note patterns and so forth about the issues that they've raised. So so that's my plan. But ask me in a year and I'll give you a more nuanced answer, I hope. We're just about out of time for this segment of today's FMFP, but don't pack up your bags, as I tell my students, because Karma Waltonen is here, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. But just to give you a preview of what else is on this handout, problem-based learning is something that we talk about at the Teaching Resources Center. It often makes more sense in engineering or science than it does in a writing class, but I'm going to return to this as a teaching tool. I recently submitted an article called How Twitter Saved My Literature Class, a case study with discussion. This is something that I reflected on last summer at the Summer Institute on Teaching and Technology. And so this is something else that I'll look at. I'm more skeptical of Twitter as a teaching tool in a small writing class. I call this Consider Updated iPad Opportunities, in part because one of my teaching heroes, Bob Summer here, has gone and bought himself an iPad, but he has concerns about what he can display with his VGA adapter. Well, now there's a program that just recently announced that PaperDesk for iPad will allow you to project a whiteboard. And this will be very important in many different disciplines, less so mine. But if you can come in, you've got a whiteboard right here to project, and it's the size of a notebook. That'll be very attractive to some faculty. Also, Netflix for iPad also now allows projection. And that'll be very attractive to Karma when she buys her iPad, because it allows you to teach with film and Winder as well. So I say here that YouTube and Pages, which is a word processing program, these can't be far behind. And I think soon the iPad will function much more like a computer rather than a consumer device in ways that will be helpful for us. And then if you want, there's a link to me on CBS teaching with my iPad. And then I'm going to look into expanding teaching with blogs, which is something I'm doing right now with my writing class. I'm going to expand my use of podcasts. I'm going to bring in more guest speakers. And I'm going to consider teaching with The Simpsons, as I say here, inspired by Karma Waltonen, who I'd like to bring up now and give this lapel microphone to. Karma Waltonen is one of my colleagues in the university writing program. She was also a graduate student here. She's been teaching for a number of years for the writing program, and has also taught, have you taught for the humanities program? And also freshman seminars. And some of the teaching work that she did on The Simpsons actually came out of one of your freshman seminars, if I remember correctly. So it's a great program, and many of you have taught freshman seminars, but allows some flexibility to make discoveries and show enthusiasms with students that we wouldn't have a chance to do always otherwise. Well, Karma has taken many of those enthusiasms and has worked with a co-author who's on the other side of the country, and the two of them have written and just now published, here it is, this book called The Simpsons in the Classroom, Beginning the Learning Experience with the Wisdom of Springfield. And I'm very thankful that she could come by today and tell us about her brand new book with a focus on teaching here at this meeting of the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program. Here you go, Karma.
In the pocket. Let's see. Well, thank you for asking me to come in. You know, we have a limited amount of time, and so while I could talk about The Simpsons and how to teach with The Simpsons forever, I won't be doing that. I will instead say I have taught classes that are specifically on the show, but I've also integrated small little aspects and moments of the show into my teaching the whole time I've been teaching, so over 11 years now. And what what we've found, my co-author and I, that the students have grown up in a world, right, where unless they're returning students, if they're sort of regularly aged students, they have grown up in a Simpsons world. The Simpsons family has been on the air since 1987 when they first premiered on the Tracy Ullman Show, and I saw that premiere and have been watching ever since. So they know the Simpsons even if they're not regular watchers. It's part of their world, and it allows for this ability to approach complex subjects in a way that allows for humor and also with familiarity. So, you know, we can teach Shakespeare, but then when we show the little 8-minute Simpsons adaptation of Shakespeare, it just gives them that other alternative and also a way to talk through adaptation. How do you take Hamlet and make it 8 minutes and make it a comedy? And that's a very difficult thing to think through. But while certainly the show lends itself to literature classes and humanities classes, there are resources just abounding about how to work this into other classes. And actually one of the chapters we have is on secondary sources and teaching resources. And so there's a whole book on the Simpsons in science. There are articles on how to use Simpsons in math classrooms. There are articles on how to use them in engineering classrooms. So there's just an amazing amount of stuff out there. And while I'm lucky I'm not forced to understand engineering enough to teach the Simpsons in that way, those resources do exist. But what I thought I could talk about in our brief time is something that I think no matter what class we're teaching, we're interested in, and that's just basically having logical students who are critical thinkers. So, you know, I'm thinking about this particularly from a writing class point of view, but I know that one of the challenges we all have is making sure that our students are thinking critically, that when they're making arguments, they're making them logically, that when they're thinking through their assertions, they're thinking those through in a way that, you know, makes sense and avoids logical fallacies. So one of the things that we specifically do in our writing courses is we talk about those logical fallacies and we go through the list and here are the most common ones. And I actually use a bunch of different resources to hammer those home. And so while I'll have a sheet that talks about logical fallacies and then we'll talk about logical fallacies in politics, and I always tell the students if they can go home and the news can be on and they can say, hey, that was an either or fallacy, their parents will so be happy that they've spent the money to send them here. This demonstrable knowledge that says, hey, they learned a fallacy name. It's amazing. So I encourage that. I always show the Monty Python, how do you tell a witch scene from the Holy Grail movie, and we go through the logical fallacies on that. But then there's also all of these logical fallacies from The Simpsons, and certainly Homer is our greatest source for those things. And so there's one episode that I'll focus on in particular today called Much Ado About Nothing. And the episode begins with a bear coming down into Springfield from the hills, and the citizens, even though the bear does nothing except maul a mailbox, the citizens become enraged and they demand that the mayor take action. And so he institutes a bear patrol, which includes a stealth bomber. For some reason, nobody can figure out. And so Homer is standing out on his lawn and he decides that the Bear Patrol must be doing its job. And I actually want to show that scene if I could get onto YouTube real quick. Are you on? Oh, cool.
So all you have to do is find a browser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like a 50-something minute, 50-second clip. Sure. And I had to find this yesterday, and I had to figure out what the keywords were for this. So search for it. And it is Tiger Away. Not that it's coming up under that now, naturally. What's on YouTube yesterday does not match what's on YouTube today. I don't know if it's coming up. Oh, there it is. Hurrah. Will the sound come up?
Oh, good question.
Patrol must be working like a charm.
There we go.
That's specious reasoning, Dad.
Thank you, honey.
By your logic, I can claim that this rock keeps tigers away.
Oh, wait.
We confused it.
Oh. Okay. I don't think maybe this is the sound out.
Not a bear in sight. The Bear Patrol must be working like a charm.
That's speech.
So, can you all hear this? I don't know. If you can.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think it's loud now.
So I'm going to just start right from the top, and I'll let you all listen as best
All
you
20
can.
seconds of it.
Not a bear in sight. The Bear Patrol must be working like a charm.
That's specious reasoning, Dad.
Thank you, honey.
By your logic, I could claim that this rock keeps tigers away.
Oh, how does it work?
It doesn't work. It's just a stupid rock. I don't see any tigers around here, do you?
Pizza, I want to buy your rock.
Okay, so he's unable to follow not only the logic needed to understand, but he's unable to follow his daughter's very criticism of this specious reasoning, and in fact thinks it's a compliment. And she does end up selling him the rock, because why not? Make money off of him. But while his logic is, of course, understandably problematic because he's Homer, the episode has the entire citizenry sort of falling for this. And when they go complain about the Bear Patrol tax that they're forced to pay once the Bear Patrol is instituted, they march into the mayor's office. They're complaining that their taxes are too high. And the mayor says, "This calls for real leadership." And then he says, "Your taxes are high because of illegal immigrants." And so the red herring completely works. They decide that, in fact, that's the problem, and they need to deport all of the illegal immigrants from Springfield. So the entire town falls for another example of sort of specious reasoning without critically thinking through it. One character even says, "Illegal immigrants, I knew it was them. Even when it was the bears, I knew it was them." He's going to find this reason to hate. And we see this happening in other episodes as well. So in one episode, Lisa the Skeptic, they find bones that they can't quite identify, and the citizenry decides that it sort of looks like it might be something that could have been an angel. And of course, there's lots of arguments about that. And Lisa goes on to the news to talk about why she is a skeptic and doesn't believe that it's an angel. Kent Brockman, the man who's interviewing her, falls into circular reasoning and sort of begging the question when he says, "But it is an angel because it looks like one." And of course, well, what does it look like? Well, it looks like. And so you go into this bad reasoning. And then she engages in a slippery slope and says, if you believe in angels, then why not unicorns, sea monsters, and leprechauns? But then the conversation further devolves into hypostatization and peer pressure and the either-or fallacy when Kent says, "That's a bunch of baloney, Lisa. Everyone knows that leprechauns are extinct." And then she says, "Look, you can either accept science and face reality, or you can believe in angels and live in a childish dream world." And so presenting, just fallacy upon fallacy upon fallacy. And the students are able, of course, to see this in a humorous way, which helps them remember and helps liven up a discussion that too often can devolve into simply a list of fallacies with a definition. And it also allows them to see it at work in situations they're familiar with. We're all familiar with having discussions with family members who are not making any sense. And we try to point that out, and they still don't make any sense. And these discussions we see on the news and with talking heads that just simply devolve into people arguing and not really getting at what we're getting at. So I want to close, actually, with the best 2 minutes in television history, and then I can certainly answer questions if there happen to be any, if we have time. These best 2 minutes happen to be a prime example of intentionally designed fallacies. So this is also from YouTube. And this is 2 minutes from an episode called Lisa the Vegetarian. And so Lisa decides to be a vegetarian, and when she demands that her school have alternatives for her as a vegetarian rather than just a hot dog, the school decides to show a videotape made by the Meat Industry Council that talks about why, of course, meat is perfectly fine to eat. And so the video that the Meat Industry Council has so kindly given to the school is called "Meat and You, Partners in Freedom." And it is just a wonderful example of completely problematic reasoning in a very intentional way, since it's designed to fool people.
Nothing beats a stroll in cattle country. Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such educational films as 2 minus 3 equals negative fun, and Firecrackers, the Silent Killer.
Mr. McClure?
Oh, hello, Bobby.
Jimmy, I'm curious as to how meat gets from the ranch to my
Jimmy. You just asked a mouthful. It all starts here in the high-density feedlot. Then when the cattle are just right, it's time for them to graduate from Bovine University. Come on, Jimmy. Let's take a peek at the killing floor. Don't let the name throw you, Jimmy. It's not really a floor. It's more of a steel grating that allows material to sluice through so it can be collected and exported. Getting hungry, Jimmy?
Mr. McClure, I have a crazy friend who says it's wrong to eat meat. Is he crazy?
No, just ignorant. You see, your crazy friend never heard of the food chain. Just ask this scientician. He'll tell you that in nature, one creature invariably eats another to survive. Don't kid yourself, Jimmy. If a cow ever got the chance, he'd eat you and everyone you care about.
Wow, Mr. McClure, I was a grade A moron to ever question eating meat.
Yes, you were, Jimmy. Yes, you were.
You're hurting me.
Yeah, it ends up in branding. Okay, so, you know, I've used this with logical fallacies. I've also used it when I've taught articles on actually the meat industry, because this came out a really long time ago, before Michael Pollan was making famous stuff, before Eric Schlosser's book. So this was really on the forefront of sort of being critical of the meat industry, and of course what you don't get to see on the killing floor in the video, which is nicely obfuscated there. But it allows the students to think about sort of what our sources are for our information, and to think about what we're being told. A scientician who doesn't actually say anything and tells us something here, but that's certainly doubtful. And I often have to remind the students, because I ask them about the Got Milk commercials, which most students actually think are PSAs by the government. They don't realize those milk commercials are in fact by the Dairy Farmers Association, and that there's a reason they're telling you to drink milk for your health, and that it's not a government initiative. And so to sort of question the sponsorship of the information that we see, even something as, you'd think a commercial would be clear enough, but since they think it's about, oh, you should do this because it's healthy, that it must be the government telling you to do that. So it allows us to open up a lot of different avenues. And I know we're at that stopping point, but I can certainly answer questions, or I can give you my email address if you ever want to just shoot me an email and say, I'm teaching this, what can I use? And I'll so tell you. Give you all kinds of ideas on what to use. Or you could just buy the book and it could tell you. So there's that kind of stuff.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. It's fun.
We've got a few minutes for questions for either one of us.
Yeah.
Let me ask you all a question.
You were so clear.
Exactly. No room for questions. Are there other examples of pop cultural texts that you all have taught with?
In the sport world, we have a whole database of movies that have sport clips that have been identified to show all sorts of different things, just engagement or process or logic or these kind of things. And again, I just find that taking the time to set those up in my presentations just really does seem to engage this generation in a way that gets the hook in to at least they pay attention to the clip.
Right.
And sometimes you can hang some of the message or your learning objectives onto that. It's been useful for me. But taking the time to embed it is what challenging.
Do students mention them in course evaluations or in talking with you about the class?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that the quarters that I really try to improve my work with that, students, it'll be reflect to say, oh, do more of those.
Yeah.
So every time I do more, they always want more.
Right. Okay, good. David?
Maybe it's worth mentioning, I don't use, maybe it's pop culture, but feature films or parts of feature films. And there's now that film clip library down at Berkeley that anyone can access. And get the clip up on a nice web page and use it in your class or in a homework assignment or something like that. And very good to search. You can search with these little problems that you have, and suddenly find all the
things you
seeds in films, say Japanese, that they happen to have.
Yeah.
It's great.
Absolutely. Antonella?
I teach foreign language. I teach Italian. So in terms of humor, that sometimes is a little bit. I would have to find Italian clips, and sometimes it doesn't work. But what I noticed is something like this: that by accessing the very day YouTube to make the lesson real, maybe just looking at it early morning when I wake up or the night before, I write myself emails, make notes, and then using that really works with students a lot. Getting that, because they use YouTube so much. And you get them interested just because, what's going on, and then they get to do whatever that, we're doing that day. And also I'm asking them, and some of them are doing that, to go into YouTube, put in keywords in Italian and see what comes up. And I'm starting to get, not much, but a little bit, students say, I found this on YouTube, can I send to the class? And then we use the, the message board and we do that. So actually, it does work. I wish I could use that more. I mean, I could, but I have to think about how to do that.
And I would like to note there is a Simpsons where Lisa learns Italian. So.
There's a Simpsons there's the language thing.
I guess one issue that comes up is this idea of a database and who creates the databases that we use. It's wonderful that Berkeley has that film clip database.
Well, that's a UC thing, though.
UC.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. But I mean that they've taken the initiative to create that so that we can all benefit from it. YouTube itself is a form of a database. We should remember too that, for instance, Dawn Sumner from geology, she will often film a little mini lesson or clarify a point right after teaching often each of her classes and upload it to YouTube and let students know about it. And she also has a channel so they can just subscribe to her. So YouTube, like Wikipedia, like many other Web 2.0 tools that we use, allows us to contribute and therefore to limit and control the content to only that information that would be most relevant for our particular audience. And then also the more that we create these resources, the more that we can call upon them in the way that when you're giving this talk and someone makes a point, you could bring up a clip very easily that you hadn't planned to teach just because it's all there on YouTube right now. Bob?
Yeah. Isn't a hidden lesson in your whole approach is that watching Simpsons is a good idea? I mean, and the professors do it. I have always used sort of popular culture examples, but I find now that they're kind of falling flat since most of them come from the newspaper, which students don't read. In class I teach now, I've been using Doonesbury. It's been very good on post-traumatic stress disorder in there, but not a single student knew who Doonesbury was. I also used Kathy, the comic strip, in terms of bulimia. This is passé. This is
Because of course everything. I mean, I make a lot of references to that the students don't get, and sort of every year realize how much older I am than they are, and especially when I see something that I don't even think is that old, that they've never ever heard of, that I sort of think should be common knowledge. I think part of the problem with that too is that media has just gotten so big, and there's so much, and now since there's YouTube and Wikipedia and all these sources. All of the information is at our fingertips, but I think that leads us to believe that we don't have this shared cultural history. So while I knew all of my parents' music, and I knew all of my parents' like I knew what they had read in high school, and I read some of that, but I knew what it was. And I feel like our students, they don't feel like our music has anything to do with them. There's no sort of generational passing down because they just have so much available to them. And since they can just plug in their iPhones and not listen to what we're listening to anyway, they're not going to get that just sort of, basic cultural literacy that I think so many of us took for granted for so long.
You give the Dawn Sumner example, I missed that. Does she take the opportunity does it occur to her that some point was not made well, and she takes the opportunity?
She does this regardless. It's my understanding that Dawn Sumner of geology will go back to her room where she has a whiteboard. She will turn on the camera that's built into her laptop, and she'll make a point. And it'll be either, say, a distillation of a lesson, or something that she might not have gotten to that she wanted to, or an example of an issue that they were raising in class. She contributes something. And the way that she put it to me is that she reflects on, what am I going to add as she walks across the quad towards her office? You know, how am I going to contribute to this class that I just had? The way that it would work for me, if I were to start doing this, would be unanswered questions. Or I noticed that just as we were finishing, we started to have a conversation about X. There's a great resource you all should know about, and here it is. You know, I found the book title. And then students will, and she knows from seeing, you know, how many times, how many visitors she gets. She knows that students will often check in like within the hour of her posting these, because they're curious to know, you know, how she's going to contribute to that class. So it's been very effective for her. If you'd like to find out more, Dawn gave a talk on this for FMFP 2 years ago or so. And I believe it was during the ATS videotaping era. So I think you can find that at fmfp.ucdavis.edu and see that talk by Dawn Sumner. I'm trying to remember just where that was because we've gone to that well many times. She's a wonderful professor, and we've used her also at the Summer Institute on Teaching and Technology and at More Thoughtful Teaching symposia. Yeah.
Yeah, I was inspired by her, and I started doing that a little bit myself. I mean, I don't feel like I have to do it after every class.
Right.
I would have a minority of classes, but the one thing I wanted to add was that, you know, it works and it's not difficult, and people should try it. But a nice side effect is that you force yourself, at least this is the way I use it, if there's a particularly tricky thing that I want to explain, and I just kind of rehearse it for the video, and then I've got this practice of, okay, now I have my 5-minute explanation of time dilation or whatever.
Right.
And then when I go into the classroom the next time I want to teach that, I have that kind of down a little more pat, and it sort of forces me to really get to the most clear explanation of some issue that I could possibly do, because I know I have a limited time on YouTube.
It's almost like you're the playwright and the actor, right? And you're saying, well, how might I best communicate this when I'm up on stage?
Right.
And you do that through rehearsal and by revision. And so, and that's worked for you. That's wonderful. The other great thing is that those resources are available for review for students throughout the quarter, and then if you do it year after year, quarter after quarter. And soon you'll be building your own database of helpful explanations of key concepts. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today to this presentation of the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program. I'm very grateful to Carmen Waltonen for coming to tell us about her new book and the ways that she's used The Simpsons as a teaching tool. And I invite you all to come back next week to see Leslie Manson-Brooks' remarks on her years of teaching here at UC Davis and advice that she has for us, as well as in 2 weeks, Naomi Janowitz from Religious Studies. Thanks very much and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.